People always ask me, well, Calvin, why do you do the shows you do? And one of the things you guys may know is that I've become a strong, strong, strong advocate and of education. Not only education, I've always been into education. I feel like it was always my thing. But I like to tell people I was a late bloomer. I didn't realize that so much was going on in our education system until my son began to go through the education system. And as he did, I began to kind of see, like, wait a minute, he reminds me of me. He was kind of quiet. He kind of does his own thing. He didn't talk too much. He kind of kept to himself, has a lot of thoughts, very, very deep. As the old folks would say, man, he sure got an old soul. Well, you live long enough and you realize that those things meant something that you didn't realize what they meant. So if you run the numbers, you'll realize having an old soul means something else. It's a good thing, but it can also mean you're neurodivergent. So tonight, what I'm going to do is start by reading something from a book. And it's a book that I'm really, really excited about. It's called Punished for Dreaming: How School Reform Harms Black Children and How We Heal. And it's by Benita. This context. And then what we're going to do is step to our first speaker, Miss Francis, and begin to understand what PBIS is and why it's so important. The system continued to impact me. Once I started college, I realized that punishment hadn't ended. It just had evolved. This time, I wasn't punished for breaking the rules. I was punished for dreaming beyond the role they had assigned to me. When I had left upstate New York, full of promise, and I attended Old Dominion University, a powerhouse in women's basketball. It was 1996, and the WNBA had just started. My dreams were beginning to take shape. I was in a top-ranked program, but there was a problem. I didn't play. I was too skinny. I got knocked around in practice. I could score on almost anyone, but I didn't fully grasp the fundamentals. Frustrated, I spent my freshman year on the bench. I came back as a sophomore determined to prove myself. But then I had a sobering realization, one that hit me harder than anything on the court. None of my teammates were in my classes. For 2 years, I had taken classes that were barely even classes, let alone college-level courses. As one of the only Black girls from the inner city on my team, I had been registered for first aid, outdoor recreation, and indoor recreation. And the students in these classes with me, mostly Black male basketball players from the same kinds of predominantly Black inner city high schools, we had all been labeled dumb Black jocks on arrival. Meanwhile, my white middle-class Black teammates were taking classes like biology, physics, chemistry, and journalism. They were studying for careers. I had been placed in courses for a degree I didn't even choose. That's when I realized the system had already decided my fate. Determined to take back control, I went to my athletic academic advisor, Mr. Robert. I told him I wanted to change my major to education. Without hesitation, he looked at me and said, "You are from the inner city and went to an inner city school. You are here to play basketball." I didn't know how to respond. I had never felt more powerless. Was it too late for me to take school seriously? Did I even belong here? My SAT scores were low. I hadn't done any advanced coursework in high school, and now I was being told without question that my place in college wasn't not to be a student, but to be an athlete. I left his office deflated. Instead of being encouraged, I was punished for believing I could be more than an athlete. So I called Miss Judy Knight, my old high school athletic director. When I told her what my advisor had told me, she didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." She flew from upstate New York to Virginia for the next home game. She met my coach. Then she turned around and said to me, "Benita, you have to leave this place." I knew she was right. And at the end of the sophomore year, I withdrew from ODU and returned to Rochester. This wasn't just my story. This is what happens when education systems label Black students before they even get a chance to prove themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Soul Thursday, and I would like to introduce you to our speaker tonight. Miss Gereen Francis, how you doing? How you feeling?
I'm doing all right. I am not fully 100%, but I'm here. I said I wasn't missing it for anything. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, you look good and you sound good. Now, what was going on with the trivia? You were kind of a little quiet there. What was going on? You just want everybody else to win? Or what was happening?
Giving somebody else a chance to win because I won the first time that I was here. I still need to get with Lady J. So I'll make sure that I get my winning. So I was giving somebody else the opportunity.
Yes, indeed. She says, I've already won, y'all, so let me give somebody else a chance.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to read like a short bio, just kind of introducing you.
Sure.
Gereen. I had it and I lost it. Is a board certified behavior analyst, BCBA, and founder of Tangerine Behavior Counseling LLC, with expertise in applied behavior analysis, ABA, and positive behavior interventions and support, PBIS. She empowers families and educators to implement effective behavior strategies. She's a dedicated advocate, and she specializes in sustainable positive behavior change for children's families and school. Welcome, Miss Francis to Soul Thursday.
Thank you so much. Thanks again for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's just jump right in. I really want to hear your origin story because when I first start jumping in this, let me just confess. Y'all have y'all seen the reels where they see that little girl, she in Walmart somewhere and she just tearing up them people's stuff? And what do we say? We all say the same thing. Lord, that girl need her butt whipped. And we all say the same thing. And Miss Francis told me, she like, Calvin, no, you can't just be reading the comments and doing what them people do. So I'm like, all right, you're gonna have to sit down and explain to me how in the world did you get into behavior therapist? Tell us about your origin story.
Yeah, of course. So, thank you again. And I just want to shout out my family who is here supporting me. So, Cheryl Francis, Gregory Francis, and I think my sister's in here too. So, thank y'all for showing up tonight. My origin story, I was not even thinking about becoming a behavior analyst. I didn't really know much about applied behavior analysis, never worked with children on the autism spectrum. So, it was new, fresh to me. I had a psych degree, psychology undergrad, and I just had my baby fresh out of college and was ready to be around adults. When he was 6 months, I said, I need to get back to work. So, long story short, someone told me, go into this career fair, apply for this position because it aligns with your degree. So I said, fine. I wasn't ready, but I listened. The recruiter asked me, hey, are you okay with working with children that are aggressive? So they may pull your hair, bite you, scratch you, punch you, kick you. And I was like, this big, 114 pounds, and was like, yeah, I'm okay with that. And I'm just thinking, like, what did I get myself into? So I went into this autism center and I was working in the severe behavior unit and I fell in love with the field of behavior science. So it's actually World Behavior Analysis Day. So just shout out to all those who are in the field. And it was just no turning back once I worked in that particular center. Now, fast forward 16 years later, I own my own business, Tangerine Behavioral Consulting, and I support families and educators around understanding the science of behavior and how to feasibly and, actually empower them to implement the strategies at home instead of depending on an expert such as myself to do it for them or work with their child. I'll stop there.
Thank you, thank you, thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Fortune favors the prepared. Well, what an awesome start. Now tell me this, when you first got in there,
Yes.
what was your first experience like working with children who struggled with behavior challenges? And how did it shape your understanding of discipline in schools?
To be honest, I was a little bit afraid in my first experience because, again, I started in the severe behavior unit. So I really was experiencing exactly what that recruiter talked about. But what I really appreciated about that experience was being able to see how we were able to systematically support that individual to be successful. So we were able to really investigate a little bit further why the behavior was happening because all behavior is communication. And I think that's one of the key takeaways for this evening is that children aren't being bad just to be bad. So that little girl that you said that falling out on the floor because she couldn't get the tool, right? Like you could say they being bad, but ultimately there's something deeper going on. And it could be a skills deficit where they're not able to really fully communicate their needs in appropriate ways. So to be able to take the most severest behaviors and really see a change in that trajectory for that child, whether they were 5 years old or 21 years old, right? We were able to support them using the science of behavior.
Thank you for that. And I love that statement. And I remember the first time you said it. It's one of those words. And, I love words. And you said, hey, all behavior is communication.
Yes.
That phrase, right? Do you mind just slowing down for a second? What does that even mean? All behavior is communication.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, when you think about ABA or applied behavior analysis, we say that all behaviors kind of fall into four buckets. And it could be that one behavior could serve multiple reasons, or we call them functions of behavior. So, first, whether it's an appropriate behavior, like if I wanted to get your attention, Calvin, and I was on mute, I might use the hand raising feature, right? So, that's my way of getting your attention. That's my behavior saying, hey, pay attention to me. Now, there's children or individuals that may engage in more challenging behaviors, but still looking for that same outcome as far as some sort of response or reaction. I always say negative attention is still attention. So even if this child is poking the bear, right? They're touching things they know they're not supposed to. They cussing, fussing, whatever. They have learned that engaging in that behavior gets the attention that they may be looking for, even if it is negative attention. So that's one. Two, people engage in behaviors to escape or avoid things they don't want to do, right? So if you all didn't want to be in this podcast, but I don't know why you wouldn't, you would take your finger and hit that leave meeting button to escape or avoid or leave this meeting. So, same with our individuals who may engage in some more challenging behaviors. They might say, you know what, gotta go, or bye, or whatever the case may be. Or they might engage in tantrums, screaming, crying, whatever the case may be, to communicate, I don't wanna be here. I don't wanna be around this person. I don't wanna do this thing that you just told me or asked me to do. So that's two. Tangible is another one. So they want to obtain their preferred items or activities. So you could deny access to that preferred item or activity. So, nope, you cannot have that. You can delay access to it. So, yes, you can have it, but you have to wait, and then you can terminate access. So, you have access to it already, but it's time to give it up or turn it off. And that could be a major issue for some individuals. And they will show that with challenging behavior. Give it back. So, instead of saying, hey, yo, that's mine, give it back, that's a punch in the face, that's a scratch, that's a bite, whatever the case may be. And then lastly, this one can be a little bit more complicated. It's called automatic reinforcement or sensory. So this is that the behavior itself is reinforcing. So I don't know if y'all notice, I try not to do it when I'm doing a professional talk, but I will play with my hair, right? It's just something that I enjoy doing. I don't know why, but this would be considered a sensory seeking behavior or serving a sensory function because something about it feels good to me. There's some kids, especially on the spectrum, you might hear the term stimming or stereotypy, where it's those repetitive behaviors such as hand flapping or vocal stereotypy, where they're repeating words or whatnot. So those are just some examples of sensory automatic. And every behavior falls into one or more of those buckets.
Thank you for explaining that because it really has helped me just begin to see people even differently because people are trying to communicate. Children are trying to communicate. And I begin to see the magic of the work you do with that one phrase. Now,
Yeah.
I really excited about the next question. A mother
Mhm.
of a twice exceptional child. It's one
Right.
thing to be an educator, to be a parent educator. That is a whole other thing. Tell us this, as a mother of a twice exceptional child, how has your personal journey influenced the work in education and behavior analysis?
Thank you for the question. And I wish he was on here right now, but he's so amazing. He's in the kitchen, like cooking chicken breasts and rice and all. So he's tearing it up in the kitchen right now. But my son is 16 now, and twice exceptional just means he's gifted with an additional learning. Exceptionality. So, as a parent, and he's a teenager now, I have to be careful on how I explain my experiences with him, full consent to do so. So, just know that he's amazing, phenomenal, and he gave me the business when he was younger. So I can speak from experience when it comes to behavior support and as a parent and as a professional. So navigating the school system, and I'll say that's where I had my most challenges because at home, it's just me and him. He gets my attention. We are just in tune with each other. So no real problems other than the normal kids just get on your nerves. It is what it is, right? But when he started going to school and I started getting these emails and phone calls about his behavior, and being that I was really kind of growing up in this field as I was raising my son, because again, I started in the field when he was 6 months old. I'm trying to utilize the skills and the information that I'm learning while also being a parent, right? And when you're in it, it's really hard to take a step back and be a professional in that space. So I found myself as a parent, even with the knowledge and experience around supporting behaviors, having challenges with collaborating and communicating effectively and advocating for my son. And so I myself had to tap into getting an advocate. And that's what I would tell folks, if you are not well versed in the education system, even as a parent, even if you are a professional, just have someone there that is your friend, your advocate, somebody that can really speak to what's going on, because your emotions will get into it and your mind will draw a blank. So just having that additional person is helpful. So I really had to advocate for him to get a 504 accommodation plan. And if you're not familiar with what that is, in general education, when your child has a disability but does not qualify for special education services, they are still eligible to get a 504 accommodation plan that addresses the symptoms or the characteristics of that disability, and it gives them additional rights. So they're not suspended, they're not kicked out of gifted classes, because those are some of the things that I was threatened with as a parent if he didn't get his behavior together. So I felt like I kept asking them, like, what are you all doing to support him in this environment? But getting pushback, because I think their expectation was for me to do something about it. And I'm like, I don't have these problems at home. It's this environment. And I just had a conversation earlier with some educators or professionals as well in early intervention space, where they're surprised, like some parents say the behavior doesn't happen at home. I don't think they being honest. And I had to break it down for them, like, y'all, those are two different. So my example, again, my son is my only child. It's just me and him. And I'm sending him to school with one adult and 20 other kids. So that is a whole different setup. So we just have to be thoughtful about how we view behaviors and how we interact with parents and even with the educators too, because I know it's not easy for them, because they do not have, some of them don't get the education, the training that they need to support children and their behaviors, because the focus is academics primarily. So either way, I feel like I'm rambling, but other than that, I will say that I had to advocate for my baby, bring in external support to ensure that I was aligning everything personally and professionally with what is expected for my child to be successful. And it just ignited my passion to be a parent, trainer, caregiver, advocate, to support families, to empower them and understand the school system from the outside. And I also worked in the school system as a behavior analyst, and I was able to advocate there too for the educators and the students and parents. And that was very powerful for me. Powerful.
I thank you for that. I love a balanced perspective. I know being a late bloomer when I got into education, and people would always tell me the stories. They're like, well, you got to understand that teachers are working hard. And I would hate that response. And because it was not balanced, it was not entertaining the whole thing. And I love what you said is that, hey, this child is not displaying this behavior in at home. And I remember when my son went through that and we began to solve the riddle. So we had his gifted teacher, we had his parents, and we had his teacher. And she's talking about, and it was just, I don't know what it was. It was just, he's more likely to be quiet than to lash out. So, and his gifted teacher helped us really, really describe it. She says, I don't see that behavior either. So we ran the numbers. You're like, at home, it's a peaceful environment. In gifted class, it's a peaceful environment. The only environment that's kind of random is the classroom. So we were able to triangulate and be like, the only time that this child, because he wasn't even doing after school, true story. He was like, yeah, I really go to the community center because that's more of my personality, he would say. And what he was saying, I got two words, right? He was saying, Dad, I think that after school is a little too ghetto for me. Can I go over there to the community center? Those people know how to act. So he wasn't used to all of this stuff going on, right? But what you say is very true. So thank you for sharing that, because it's one of the rare times I've seen an educator, a parent just be balanced and say, hey, I was figuring this out as I was growing, and I had to advocate. And I can tell you, you're talking about that's your baby. It was emotional. So thank you for sharing that. Now let's
Mhm.
talk about the messy middle. Lord, when I was in, I got to go back when I was in school. The teachers were like aunties. They were like family members, right? They were like, boy, get over here and tell your mama. And it was all love, right? And we just got different experiences. And I took about a 30-year break, and my son go into the education, I'm just gonna call it system. And all of a sudden, they not aunties no more. They not family members. I was talking with a friend and I said, I feel like the education system is a assembly line that's moving real fast, too fast for you to do your one job and put on that boat, that widget. And your child is the thing on the assembly line is moving too fast. And if they don't teach him math basics in the 15 minutes they get to teach math basics, then it's over. He's going to be 5 years later, and he's still not going to know math basics. So I began to see, wow, it has changed. So let's talk about the messy middle. How does discipline in schools disproportionately impact Black children, especially in comparing it to white or other groups?
Yeah, so it all boils down to how we view behavior. I always say it's a mindset, right? So we all come with our own values, beliefs, parenting styles, right? And so when you are sending your children to school, you're sending them in classes with adults who, again, have their own values, their own beliefs about behaviors and implicit biases, unfortunately. And when it comes to when our children kind of behave in a way that is deemed as disrespectful or defiant, then it's this huge deal. It's kind of like they don't really know how to connect with our children, and I think that scares people. And when I say they, it's black, white, whoever. It's a culture within the education system, unfortunately, because what I will say is that my personal experience, especially when my son was younger, that elementary to middle, it was my own Black women that were giving me the hardest time when it came to thinking about positive behavior supports, right? So, with that being said, we're not trying to support our Black children's behaviors. We're trying to discipline and punish them into behaving. Behavior, again, is communication. We need to teach them what's appropriate and what's not. And it does not just fall on the parent because, like I said, I had this training. I have Caribbean roots. Okay. So I know parents on the call, you already know my background may have included. And I tried that with my son too, because he was not perfect, but I saw that the corporal punishment was not it was not changing the behavior long term. And I think that's where we need to shift our mindset. Corporal punishment, punitive consequences such as out of school suspension, suspension, that just further the achievement gap between our Black students and our white students because they need to be in the classroom learning. But if we're kicking them out for, yes, cussing out a student or cussing out a teacher is disrespectful. However, why are they doing that? They don't want to be in your class. They don't want to be in your class because why? For two reasons. It could be you don't have a good relationship with them, there's no mutual respect there, or they really don't know how to do the work. And the easiest way to get out of your class and not have to be embarrassed because they can't read or do math is to cuss you out because in the past you kicked them out of the class and they escaped or avoided that work. So it's just we have to do a full big picture view on what these behaviors are and why it's happening and come from a supportive lens rather than a punitive corporal punishment lens because that does not support students long term, not all students. So when you talk about the tiers, and I love that you had that question in there, Tier one are supports for all students to be successful. That's the foundation of the pyramid. If we don't have those tier one strategies in place, and that's building those relationships, having schedules, routines, making sure that we're clear with those behavior expectations and teaching them, and also acknowledging when students meet those expectations. And even if you're a parent, even at home, that acknowledgement piece, I hear this all the time. Why should I acknowledge or reward my child for doing what they're supposed to do? But then we nitpick and we bring attention to all the behaviors and the things that they are not supposed to do. So they're learning I have to act up in order to get some sort of attention or some sort of response from this teacher, from this adult. So again, that tier one is is foundational. It has to be in place. Tier two is if so if like 20% of those students still need additional support, because by nature, no one is perfect and they will need supports. So you would move up the tier to give them some more targeted supports, some social, emotional, and behavior supports. And then ultimately, you end up on tier three if that student still is having challenges with their behavior. And that's where usually I come in as a behavior analyst, where we do a full assessment, a functional behavior assessment, and a behavior intervention plan to have written down recommendations on what it is that we need to do to support this child to be successful. So when you talked about your son and you did the triangulation and saw that it was only happening in this particular class, that's what a functional behavior assessment does. We take a step back and we observe and take data on what's going on, and then we analyze that information and write down prevention strategies and teaching strategies to support that child. That is their right in school to get an FBA or a BIP written, especially if they're in special education or if they even have a 504. So if you're a parent or you know of some parents with students or children that have some challenges at school, make sure y'all talking about that functional behavior assessment. Sign consent for them to do that. I know and that's another thing as a parent, we sometimes, are hesitant to label our children, get them evaluated, sign off consent for assessments. But sometimes we are kind of feeding into the detriment of our children if we don't go that extra step. So, what I will say is reach out to support, ask questions, be open to just learn instead of just not moving forward with additional support, because that is something that protects our children within the public school system.
Thank you for sharing that and that confirmation. What I want to do is give the opportunity for the audience to ask some questions. I want to wrap up with one last question with you and then go to the audience. And everything you're saying, it just warms my heart. Having gone through the journey recently, I know what it means to be nervous about paperwork that you're referring to. I know what it means to be considering assessment and Black folk be like, oh, don't you do that. And you walk around and there's nobody you can talk to that even have a reference. All they have is be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. So it feels so good to have you here and to have Cheryl here because you guys deal with this every day and you know it inside out. So I got a couple questions for you just to kind of help the audience get context. And then I can't remember if you have a book or a workshop. We want to make sure people follow you and they support the work you do because you're located in Atlanta. And if we can talk about your services and also if you talk to parents, because since we have a nationwide audience, sometimes people are like, hey, I'm in New Mexico, but I need to talk to somebody that looks like me and it can explain it and break it down for me. So I'm going to summarize everything in this last question. I often say, what does good look like? Because when you're dealing with these situations with these schools, what I love about that intro story that I started with, the old athletic director says, you have to leave this place. And it's exactly what I did with my son when I'm like, we got to remove him from this school. This school was affecting his self-esteem. It was affecting his identity. It was affecting his confidence. And like you said, it wasn't the other people who were doing it. It was the people who looked like us that were doing the worst damage. So with my son, we had to leave this place. Help us understand what good looks like. If they don't have somebody like you, a behavior specialist, what can they do? What does good look like? What would a school who's doing this correct look like versus if they're not doing it correct, how do they find somebody like you if they're not in Georgia? But go ahead and
Yeah, man, that's a loaded question. I'm gonna try to keep it short and sweet. Good. What I've learned is that a school or a district can have a reputation of being good, right? And good to this on paper. You look at the scores, you hear folks, my child is doing great, but you dig a little deeper and you kind of see to Dr. Love's book that there's a certain demographic that's not doing that great. And when you dig into the data and see their academic scores, suspension data, you're seeing that this good school is good for some, but not all. So that's a hard question to answer. I will also say that even a school that is not deemed as good based on scores or whatnot could have some very phenomenal teachers. So I would say it's more about the teachers and the administrators that you really have to pay attention to, not the scores, not what's online. Meet with not the zip code, right? Really meet with those folks and see, are they pouring into the children? Do they build relationships? What do they value, right? Look at, are they teaching those expectations? Are the expectations clear? Do they have do they communicate with the parents? Do they welcome parents in to have conversations? Are they open to the feedback? So it's more about the relationships, who's the leader in that school, in that district. But I mean, I would say more look at the school that your child is going to be in, meet with administrators. I was told to do that, but over my head, I didn't know. But once I started working in the school system, I realized it really does start with the leadership and it trickles down. So asking the right questions, what do you value? Sometimes you don't have that capability or opportunity to do so, so making sure you're connected with folks in the neighborhood. Facebook got all types of groups or whatnot. Sometimes they're toxic, but just try to really tap into support system that's near you so you can ask the right questions and really see what's going on beyond the surface.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that. Let's turn to the audience. Audience, I know you have some questions. I want to get out of the way. I paused because I was having too much fun, but this is an opportunity to ask your question. So you can raise your hand, you can unmute yourself, you can type it in the chat and we'll read it. I got more than enough questions, but this is your opportunity to connect with Miss Francis and really understand what's going on. And while we're rating on questions, Jay, help me fill those questions and just raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have a question and we'll see you pop up to the top. But as you were talking, I knew what you said is so, so real. It's like, hey, the school is supposed to be good. It's supposed to be okay, but not for this group over here. You got to look, as they say, peel the onion and look back. And when you peel the onion, you discover, wait a minute, how about the kid that said on free lunch? How they doing? And I
Yep.
discovered there was the stigma, and the stigma was like, them white folks will sue you, right? So we're gonna cater to the white folks and ignore the black folks. And I'm just saying this out loud because I can do it.
You
They
just said
cater to the white folks because they expect the white folks to sue and they ignore the black folks.
that hit a nerve a little bit because reflecting back on like supporting and advocating for my son, I didn't want to be that parent, right? As a black woman. And then that also think about what comes with that, with the stereotype of black women. I'm just an angry mom coming in here. But these white folks be coming in here with lawyers, advocates, emailing directly to the superintendent. I would never, right? But now reflecting back on it, I should have. And I could have and really won a case and how they were treating my son. So again, advocate for your child. Help those who, if your children are grown, if you know kids, people with kids that are struggling or need support, help them out. Tell them you better advocate for your child because these white people be going in a school system. They go in.
And I'm thankful for the young folks that they gave us this word. They said they will be playing in your face. They sit there, they smiling, they got the HR political smile, they act like they're your best friend, and they ignored your child for a whole semester while they smiling in your face. I'm just gonna let it go for now. But it seems like there is a question from Cheryl. What can we do to protect our children now that Felon 47 has issued an order to close the Department of Education?
Y'all, so I'm even trying to do my due diligence in researching and learning what exactly is this going to mean for our children who do depend on federally supported programs. This is a real deep question, and what I would say is educate yourself and stay knowledgeable about what's going on so that you can be more proactive as best as possible and prepare. I would say, reach out to your Congress folks, legislation. Like, you really do have to just go out there and advocate and tell them why it's important as to why this is not okay. Now, I know that, with it closing, what I'm thinking is it's going to go to funnel to the state, right? The State Department of Education, where they'll have more, autonomy with how they use funds or make decisions. But that's like a little bit less checks and balances, and it's a little bit scary. So all I would say is, as of right now, all we can do is just continue to educate ourselves, make sure that we're staying current, and then with that information, trying to be as proactive as possible to continue to advocate for what our children needs.
I love it. One last question, and Dr. Timothy Nelson, I see you. We're getting ready to pivot to my brother. I'm so excited. I've been waiting for the show all week, y'all. Whenever Dr. Nelson pops up, I just get excited, man. I've been playing X-Man. I've been playing all the righteous music because Dr. Timothy gonna be here. You missed it, brother. Anyway, I digress. There's a question, and Karen just got a question, and she's a hard question. I'm gonna read it so y'all know. She said, and I just want to put some funk on it. She says, can we address the utilization of neurodivergence as a catch-all and parental expectations that their children be given accommodations, or blaming the teacher when the children do not appear to be learning or scoring to their expectation? It sounds like some gaslighting going on. I think what Karen said is there's another side to this coin, right?
Yep.
What is the opposite side when the parents may be scapegoating, gaslighting, and using neurodivergent as, let's say, a blame game? I don't know. Have you seen that one? I mean, you advocate on both sides. What are your thoughts?
Kind of seen that. And what I think about are those children who may have gone through elementary school, middle school, not been evaluated, not screened or flagged as needing additional supports, but all of a sudden they're in high school and they need special education services, right? And that's what is happening there. That's they're in high school, PT, SAT, ACT scores, right? They're trying to get those accommodations so that their children could get extra time or whatnot, so that they can score a little bit higher because of college, so on and so forth. So I have seen that. That's kind of out of my scope when it comes to just behavior support, but I have experienced that. And that's just another way that I've noticed that folks who understand the system and know their rights and can speak the language to a school system can get away with some of these situations because they know how to play the game. They know how to work the system. Is that
Yeah.
kind of what you were talking about, Karen? Just let me know.
Yes, indeed. I feel you hit the nail on the head because there's definitely some exploitation happens and it makes it bad for everybody, right? Well, I want to thank you, Ms. Francis, for just breaking it down for us. And I feel like we were brief, and I feel like this topic is just the beginning. So this has to be, part one of another session because I feel like we can go so deep into it. And, if you haven't been seen tonight, if you don't feel like she opened the door, make sure you follow her. Tell us about what's next for you,
Yes,
the action, how they can follow you, how they can support the work you do.
absolutely. So I already saw that someone dropped my LinkedIn, so you can connect with me directly. Tamika, thank you. I'm also on Instagram. I'm trying to do better with my social media, but that's at tangerine_behavioral. Honestly, go to my website, tangerinebehavioral.com, and you can see what services I do provide. I provide a host of services, but my passion is definitely the parent training and education. I have an Empowering Families workshop, which is 6 weeks for families who have children who are engaging in more significant challenging behavior. And we take the 6 weeks to go through creating a full positive behavior support plan that you can actually create for home and share to advocate with your child's teacher or child care provider, whatnot. So if that is something you're interested in, don't hesitate to reach out. If you just need some consultation, someone to talk to, I also provide that as well. So just reach out to me and ask any questions you have, and we can go from there.
I love it. It sounds like you can provide those services nationwide, right? They can hit you up on the website and you can do some parent consultations, right?
Yeah, it's virtual. So if you are in New Mexico, like you said too, we can talk for sure.
Awesome, awesome. Well, make sure you drop your website in the chat. I want to thank you for hanging out with us tonight. Brother Dr. Nelson, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fine. I'm tremendous. Am I off mute? Okay, cool.
Hey, you look good. I mean, I like that picture you sent me, man. Can you borrow the hat, the hat, and how about the jacket too? The hat and the jacket and the shirt underneath it, right? Because I'm telling you, it was a little swag in that picture, man. I mean,
That was from a magazine shoot, actually.
I knew it. Let me mute Jay because she having a whole conversation.
The New Mexico magazine had me in it. And so that was from the shoot of the magazine. So that's where that swag came from. It's not an everyday thing.
Hey, did they let you keep the clothes? Did they?
It was my clothes. So
Yeah, I knew it. I knew it. See, I'm okay telling the brother. I mean, when I saw that, you were leaning to the side a little bit. I mean, I don't know how they caught you, man. It was a good shot. Dr. Nelson was first on Soul Thursday last year when, around the time we launched the State of Black Man. And we got really, really deep into some conversations. And it was at that moment I'm like, he has to be back. And your assistant, thank you, Marissa, for just really being so responsive, supporting Soul Thursdays, for donating. We appreciate you. But I knew we had to come back because even though we were doing like this broad conversation, I was like, Brother Tim done been through some experiences. Yeah, before I read his intro, I got to tell you one thing he said that just done stuck with me since. He's like, he's working on his PhD. He out there, if you ever been into one of these high ed experiences, right? They got these, what they say, I'm not going to call them gatekeeper, but let's say the gate's not open, right? And you got some people who are guarding the gates. And he talks about writing this book. And now I give PhDs a hard time because, man, once they get in that data, they're on a different planet, right? So Dr. Tim said this, and I knew he got it. He said, I had to write the book in a way that I could get certified and get past these people who were holding the gate, his academic advisors and things like that, his committee, but get to the people who needed the information and they would say, yep, that's real. What a blessing to not only be able to do that, but to even have the awareness. I gotta help the people and get it to the message. I mean, was that not what Du Bois was doing?
Exactly.
Was he not trying to write this thing? I can only imagine the people who were supporting him and sponsoring him be like, yeah, we're going to put you out there, but hey, make us look good, or, don't say nothing about us. I can only imagine, but kudos to you for having that awareness. Let me read you guys a short intro to Dr. Timothy E. Nelson. He is an historian and an author, an expert on Blackdom, New Mexico, and the Afro frontier. His work explores Black identity, manhood, and community resilience through forgotten history. Dr. Nelson sheds light on how historical Black communities resisted oppression and how their legacy can empower future generations. Thank you, Dr. Nelson. How you feeling, man?
Tremendous. Your questions that you sent me put me in a philosopher's mood. So if I start talking in circles, feel free to cut me off where you think you can get me right on track, because I've been on this for a week since you sent it, and good luck.
Well, we wanted to talk to you tonight after, I met you and we talked on the show. I said, you know what? I feel like Dr. Timothy can break down not only history, but manhood and identity. So let me just go ahead and let's start with the origin story, because we like to cover topics here at Soul Thursdays, what I call the origin story, the messy middle, and the call to action, what's next. What drew you to history of Blackdom, New Mexico, and how does it relate to modern Black manhood?
Blackdom, New Mexico, I wasn't drawn to it. It came to me because I was a poor college student. But once I was in my studies, then I began to understand, if we're going to call it Black manhood in the modern sense. And so we're talking about the turn of the 20th century. So you're talking about the new Negro. That is modern Black manhood, and it's evolved over the last 100 years. So Blackdom, New Mexico allowed me to deal with manhood without the last 100 years. In other words, the way that we see Black men, we should be able to see it 100 years ago in its premiere, at its apex. You're talking about the Harlem Renaissance. You get what I'm saying? You're talking about Du Bois. You're talking about, I don't want to get into the lecture of the 1920s, but this was the next generation after enslavement was over. The enslaved were still on this planet. And so Blackdom becomes this place of sovereignty, so that these people who were free, according to Granger's order, is now in a place of sovereignty. So modern Black manhood is in a state of sovereignty rather than fighting for some fragile freedom. So that's the way that I put it in a capsule of Blackdom being related to modern Black manhood. And I take it biblically and I go, modern manhood is like going from Moses, right? That was manhood. And then there was Joshua. Moses didn't get them to the promised land. Joshua did. So manhood isn't about always completing the mission, even though you are the man. Being the man in modern times means that, well, you got to prepare for the next generation and prepare the next generation to do what you might not be able to do yourself. So I'm going to stop there. I told you I was getting into the philosophy.
I love it. I love it. I love it. You had me at Joshua and Moses. I named my son, middle name Joshua.
There you go.
Because when I began to look at myself, I said, I'm an imperfect man. I got a little, neurodivergent. I get a little excited sometimes. I call people by the wrong name. I get that from my grandpa. But anyway, he just called everybody boy, girl. He had a bunch of grandkids. But the point is, Moses was the imperfect leader. So he didn't step into the motherland. The promised land. So what I began to realize is I must name my son Joshua. because I feel like he would begin to pick up and carry the torch of the work that remains to be done. You had me at Joshua. You know,
That's it.
I began to think about these questions because when you begin to really what sparked this conversation is you're like, Calvin, you got to do a show on surviving suicide. You said you got to do that. And of course, I'm like, man, I've been thinking about it, but I couldn't really approach it. But I'm like, let's just, you know, do it a little differently. So this question really, I really had it for myself. I'm like, Dr. Nelson, how did Black men historically, right? And don't mind give us a little background on Black New Mexico for the people who weren't here last time. Historically, what were these Black men, these Masons, what were these people doing that led to a sense of identity, purpose, despite the systematic oppression? Take us back to Black New Mexico.
So Plessy v. Ferguson, 1896. Blackdom starts in 1903. So that's less than a decade. Plessy, for Black men, even though it says separate but equal, was separate and equal under the law because Black men never saw themselves through the lens of white people. They knew that there was a flaw in seeing yourself through the lens of white people. So they developed their own, and this is something that I talk about generally in the terms of Afrotopia. I won't get into that right now. But historically in frontier communities, what you had were ministers, military men, and Black Freemasons. And that doesn't mean that they were all separate. They could all be one person, like in the case of Blackdom. In 1903, Frank Boyer and 12 others incorporated, signed their names. Some of them were born under the institution of slavery, incorporated the Blackton Townsite Company in 1903. Well, that's community, but now you have to build a town. This is just, have you ever started a business and now you went out to the thing and you paid your $35, but now you have to do the business? That is how Black identity, Black community was formed in frontier spaces. And so they started on the first thing, the church, right? So now church is the place that is shaping them, but inside that church, not just the church, because, people have their church hurt today and they don't quite understand what the church was, but realize the church was a bank, all right? Tax-free. But we can go down that rabbit hole another time. But I just want you to understand, economics was taught in church and outside of church, because now you have those Freemasons who are in church, outside of church. Now, those Freemasons were farmers. So now we're talking about philosophers, farming, church, and a lot of them also were conscripted into the military or decided to go in. So now you have this institutional knowledge that allows Black folks to shape themselves outside of the gaze of white people. That's why Blackdom was so important. Segregation actually was the best of times. They struck oil in less than 20 years. I'm going to say that again. Hold on. People who were born under the institution of slavery started a town in New Mexico and within 20 years struck oil. So I hope that answers your question. It was about the daily toil, but also the spiritual. And oh, by the way, they had a HBCU. They built an HBCU that put out PhDs. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you for that because, it does give context. And what I like about the context is identity is not connected to white proximity. The identity was shaped on land. It was shaped on spirituality. It was shaped on farming. It was shaped on military. It was shaped on other things, but white proximity was nowhere in the equation. What would you say that Black men can learn today from the Afro frontier? So much has changed. You was alluding to it. So much has changed.
Well, I'm gonna go to Granger's order, number 3, I think it is. Juneteenth. The Afro frontier was let me explain. First, I coined the phrase, I defined it, and I did my dissertation on this thing that I came up with. So Afro frontier can be a dissertation long. So I'm going to give you a few sentences. The Afro frontier is being a person of African descent and deciding to take on your own self-determination in a frontier space. And when you're in a frontier space, in this case, you're talking about New Mexico going from a territory to a state. Remember, Puerto Rico is still a territory. So the federal laws versus the local laws, and Black folks had to maintain themselves within it. Now, these people are leaving North Carolina, Georgia, Oklahoma, all of these places where Jim Crow is the call of the day, right? And so New Mexico, because it was a territory, didn't have Jim Crow. So Black folks, Black men in particular, could seek a sovereignty that they heard in church, God's sovereignty. So when you're seeking God's sovereignty, you're gonna look for a promised land. You're gonna look to build a promised land. And so the three institutions that I described, the military, Freemasons, and the ministers, they help to do that. Okay? So Afro Frontier is simply your ability to take what is given and then flipping it to your advantage. Again, going from a separate but equal to a separate and equal. Remember, the current president has decided that, contractors for the government no longer have to abide by anti-discrimination laws. They can now literally put up a whites only and still be contracted by the government. But realize the federal government doesn't have room for those Jim Crow laws, so it has to come from locally. So the Afro Frontier was a way to escape for the most part, but also to wall off so that they can build their own consciousness, their own understanding, outside of, again, the gaze of white folk.
I like where you're going there. And as you begin to describe that phrase, I begin to see a lot of opportunity for today's Black men. And it reminds me of a buddy. He's, went out and purchased his acres and he's farming the land and he's constantly doing the thing. He's raising the chickens, right? And he's beginning to create his own space. So I see that opportunity for Black men to create their own space where they have sovereignty. Go ahead.
See, the key is, when we look at Granger's order, right? Granger's order, the thing that, quote, set us free, that officially everything is free. Let me read this to you. The freedmen are advised to remain at their present home. These people are enslaved in Texas. The freedmen are advised to remain at their present homes and work for wages. There ain't no hope in this order. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and they will not be supported in idleness, either there or elsewhere. There's no hope in there. There's no build your own town. So these Black men, Black people, we're talking about Black men right now, but this wouldn't have happened without Black women. But we're talking about Black men. But trust me, Black women were the only reason why this actually was able to go through. But we're talking about Black men. So if we look at just what was allowed, what was given to them, quote, freedom given to them, they turned that around and said, okay, now I'm going to employ this freedom and go for this sovereignty thing that I kept hearing about in church.
Yes. I'll tell you, I'm getting excited, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because what I'm seeing is that, we've been talking about this nuance of entrepreneurship. We've been talking about this nuance of building your own. And, times change, words and language change, but it's something about the ability to build your own. It's hard. It's scary. And I can only imagine what the brothers were going through back then, because you could stay out there in Jim Crow, or you can say, you know what? I am going to go out into the wilderness and build my own from scratch. And what that really, it just makes me feel resilient. I'm thinking the brothers back then were making a resilient decision to go out into the rural, the path less traveled. And it seemed like today there's opportunity. Let's talk about health and resilience. I did a show. It was over the break. We took a 3-month break. And I began to realize that a lot of my brothers, the Black men, were isolated. They were doing their best, trying to be a good husband, trying to do this, but they were isolated. And when I began to dig into it, and I was like, why are you isolated? And everything they were giving me was like, because I got to do this, and I got to do this, and I got to do this, and I got to do this. And it hit me, but you're lonely, and you're melting away. And I began to talk about the favorite song that I stumbled upon from War, Slipping into Darkness. And I began to see, and I told this good friend of mine, I said, brother, I've known you for a while, ever since that girl broke your heart. And ever since then, it's been over 10 years later, you've been slipping into darkness over and over again. What would you say? Your thoughts and recommendations for the brothers back then and the brothers today who have maybe stepped into some form of isolation and maybe need to find resilience to cope with that isolation, displacement, or what's going on in society? Because I feel like we're going through it all again. Any thoughts you'd like to share on that? I know it's deep, but any thoughts? Yeah, sorry. Any thoughts you want to share? Just make it up, man.
Just the isolation and speaking in terms of resilience. As a grown man, like different than in my 20s, because I've been through enough, I can kind of lean into the resilience part. A lot different than I did in my 20s, right? As a recovering isolationist, I would say at some point you have to embrace the isolation and in a healthy way. If you're isolated now and you know that it is not something that you would have children around, for example, figure out how your isolation can become less toxic to other people. Because I'm talking about the depths of isolation. I'm not talking about, I just need a little wine today and then I'll be good tomorrow. I'm talking about the depths, one that you can't always come back from. That is when you have to take it minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. Because the option is death. The option is death in that kind of isolation. And for a lot of us, especially if you're at a certain age, death ain't that bad because we grew up in a certain way. We weren't supposed to make it till we were 18. So if you're 48, you good. You've lived your life. However, if you're in that isolation and you're looking for a way out, if you're looking for a quote hope, or you're looking outside of hope, you have to have faith in something else because everything that has created what is Black started with hopelessness. Go to Granger's Order, look for hope. You're not going to find it, but they are free. Well, now think about it. These enslaved people who had been enslaved their whole lives, not quite taught to read. They had to teach themselves. And now you're on this plantation in, I don't know, Texas. How do you go from Texas outside of the plantation? How do you even know that? Right? Like, what do you do? Who do you reach out to? Imagine that isolation. Imagine just being freed. You're a man. You're in your 40s. Your labor years are kind of over because you kind of worked really hard on that slave plantation. Now you're isolated. Well, like today, what did they do? Alcohol, opium, sex, church, selling out to the white man. That was the coping mechanism, right?
Well, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Inside of that coping, whatever you're doing, because if you're coping, that means you still have hope. As someone who has been at that slipping in the darkness, you almost got me with that one. You trying to be Oprah over here, So it started playing in my head, and I can, So when you're slipping into that darkness, you cannot lean on your own understanding. You are not well. You're gonna have to find faith, and that faith doesn't have to be church, synagogue, or mosque. It could be in you. The fact that you still coping means you're trying. And I think the people on the outside of that coping should also know that you're trying, right? But a lot of times the people on the outside of that coping just looks at you and then creates more shame. So in the depths of that isolation, find faith. Do not seek approval or anything outside of that, because now, you can get something outside of that isolation, but if you are isolated like that and this person that you are reaching out to lets you down, which happens a lot, or you can't get a hold of them because they know that you've been calling them, because my brother, I'll give you that story later. Basically, my brother said a dude called me and I just wouldn't even pick up the phone, man. I just knew he was just going to ask me for something. So again, I may be the one on that end of the call that you don't want to pick it up. Remember, this out of that isolation is going to have to come from you, and you're going to have to replace that hopelessness with faith in something. And then you're going to have to find that something less and less toxic, because the first something is probably more toxic than you think. I'm trying not to go down the rabbit hole too much.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? I'm talking about in a real isolation. I'm not talking about the regular.
Yes, the real isolation. We're not talking about loneliness. We're not talking about you want to go to the movie. We're talking about that darkness.
Yeah.
Darkness that sometimes, and just so you guys, if you're wondering, why did we choose to cover such a topic? Well, we live during a time where a lot of people are hopeless. And about 6 months ago, I lost a good friend of 30 years who gave up. She gave up. And I talked to her the day before she gave up. And you see, what's going on in our society, a lot of people are feeling the weight of it. And I like what you talk about when you talked about that phone call, because you could be on any side of that phone call, but I like what you said. You said there's some hopelessness, but then there's faith. You got to find something to believe in. But when you find that thing to believe in, don't be surprised if it's toxic and it's not as good as whatever. You're going to have to find faith again and faith again and faith again. Let's talk about community. And I want to open it up. Miss Frances is still here. And thank you guys for hanging out. I know we're going long, but when we get deep in a conversation, we got to let it flow. Let's talk about community. How do you see Black brotherhood and mentorship shaping the mental well-being of Black men today, and anything you want to say about Black masculinity today. And then we're going to go to the audience and give you guys a chance to ask questions. And we're covering this serious topic because it has to be covered. It's not getting any better. We got to look out and check on our people. So, Brother Dr. Nelson, thoughts on community, Black brotherhood, mentorship, and masculinity?
When I talk about Black masculinity, I start with, I don't know what it is. Because generally speaking, if I tell you what it is now, it wasn't what it was 10 years ago, and it wasn't what it was 20 years ago, especially Black masculinity. We can go down that rabbit hole of what Black masculinity is, but I'm going to start with the other part of your question, which was brotherhood and mentorship. It is essential for a Black man. If you identify as a Black man, you need a brotherhood or mentorship. There's a reason why gangs sprang up when it did, and are still here, because a brotherhood is required, toxic or not. And my apology, but it is what it is. It is priceless. It is the peak of humanity when you have a brotherhood that doesn't require maintenance. You understand what I'm saying? 5 years I ain't spoke to you, and now I'm talking to you again, and we just brothers again, right? You need a brotherhood that doesn't require maintenance. I don't have to stroke your ego in order for us to be in the same space, because, I might not be in that same frame of mind, right? So when it comes to the brotherhood, it's gonna be one that doesn't require maintenance. And when it comes to mentorship, understand that the mentor you pick is not the end all. There's always going to be a point where they reach a limit with you. Your mentorship is not to the end.
Oh, that's real.
Eventually, you become your mentor. Eventually, you figure out your mentor has weak spots too. And so, because we're all human. So again, when it comes to mentorship, pick whoever you want, but know that they are flawed too, that they have old ideas that need to be rejiggered too. So that's my take.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Dr. Nelson, for just breaking it down for us and sharing such deep, 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 thoughts. And having lost a friend recently, you can't explain. You can't explain. I remember being angry with her. I talked to her the day before on her birthday, and just being angry, and then being mad, and then being, oh my goodness, it's just like the whole thing. It's complicated. But anyway, I got some questions from the audience. Jay, let's talk to the audience. Let's see what we got. Miss Francis, if you want to, come back, if you got any questions for women, we often tell when we have these guy conversations that women, we love for you to participate because we know somewhere you are connected to a son, an uncle, a brother, a father. And you may find, and I think people may not know this origin story of Soul Thursdays. I started Soul Thursdays on a trip to Texas when I went home and noticed that my dad was drinking in the dark. And it already took me 15 years to explain to him what I do as an engineer, so I knew it was going to take me very much longer to explain to him, a working class boomer, about mental health. So instead, I said, well, Pops, you ain't got to drink alone. Log on, I'll play some music when I get back to Atlanta, and we'll have a drink together. And that's when I learned that sometimes these conversations take a lot longer than you think. It's not a 5-minute conversation about mental health. It's a 5-year conversation about mental health. And that's when I began to realize that sometimes when you're talking to men, you got to take your time. When you're talking to people, you got to take your time. Talk to me, Jay. I know you always got a question. What's on your mind?
Dr. Nelson always gets me because he's got the language. I always feel like it's one step from a poem, but then it's also steeped in history. So I am just like, I never thought about, and I like the way you guys put this together. I never thought about the frontiersmen and dealing with that type of isolation. And it makes so much sense. I love the part where you're saying when they're in that type of isolation, there's an option that is death, right? But when you were talking about them reaching for kind of a lifeline, could you break that down a little bit deeper? Because you said don't do one thing, but then do another. You know what I mean? Like, I want to make sure.
Clinton Ragsdale was a major figure in Blackdom, New Mexico, a town that lasted about 30 years. And in the middle of those years was a real town. And then when they struck oil, they kind of leased their land. Clinton Ragsdale was one of those who, yeah, he leased his land to oil speculators, but he didn't want to go into Roswell. Now, why not go into Roswell? This is Roswell, the place with the aliens. Y'all know the aliens. I'll tell y'all my conspiracy theory about the aliens and Roswell.
Okay.
He refused to stay in Roswell, even though he had a house there, and that's where his family was. That's where his wife and kids were, in Roswell. But he refused to leave his tent sometimes in Blackdom. So he was seeking isolation. This is also somebody who experienced North Carolina's rise in racism, the racial nadir, so on and so on. What was he isolating himself from? He was isolating himself from the Ku Klux Klan that had just come into Roswell, right? So he was in a comfortable situation. He owned a ranch out in Blackdom that could feed the family that is in Roswell, but he refused to physically be in Roswell with the family. They had to, he would come out for church, definitely, but and Roswell's 20 miles north of Blackdom, so it's not that far. But that isolation, seeking it is one thing, and knowing that you got to go to church is the other thing. I don't know if that answers your question, but it gets to that isolation for some people is required because you can't talk all the time with someone for hours on end. Sometimes you got to talk to yourself. And somebody like Clinton Ragsdale, who went through the institution of slavery in North Carolina, how much talking did he have to do in order to heal as he was older? This is 1800s, but he grew up at a time when, this was sharecropping and lynching and that kind of thing. So some of that isolation is going to be important. It also can lead you to drinking. This was prohibition too, right? One of the largest landowners in Blackdom was a bootlegger, a madam. I can go on. She's in Roswell, though. That's one of the reasons why a lot of Black folks didn't want to go to Roswell, too, is because it was ran by a madam, a bootlegger, a gunslinger named Mittie Moore Wilson, a woman. She was also the largest landowner in the Blackdom Oil Company. So I don't know if I answered your question, but, there's a little bit of history on how, the isolation came both directions. Question. Can you ask your question again?
That was what I wanted to know, because there was a nuance to the isolation, and I want to make sure I heard it. And that part about the isolation, what is he isolating from? But then also knowing that he needed to go to church. So it's like it's helping benefit from the isolation, but not allowing it to go so deep that you completely disconnect.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, indeed. Well, I want to say thank you, Dr. Nelson, for hanging out with us tonight. As I begin to do a summary on tonight's show, I want to say, well, Dr. Nelson, tell us about what's up with you, because I know you were doing your audiobook. You were, what's next? Where can people follow you? Tell us about the latest. What's going on with you?
Okay, so I would like everyone that's here right now, if you're in front of a computer, open up another tab, and I'm going to give you time to do it. Put in Afro Frontier. You can either Google it or put it in an AI tool. And what I am doing now, and will be doing for the rest of my life, is growing the notion of Afro Frontier and Afro Frontierism. So if you put in Afro Frontier in Google, you end up with everything that I have been doing for the past decade to grow the idea. You see lectures, you also see descendants of Blackdom in here. In fact, there's a song, a Christian rap song called Afro Frontier by a descendant of Frank Boyer, who was the first president of Blackdom Townsite Company. So what I am doing is developing a digital colonization so that everywhere you go, the kind of thing that I'm talking about is being spread. The life is being spoken into people through this notion of Afro Frontier. But the short version is, yes, the audiobook is coming out, I think, in May. And hopefully I will get this job and be a professor somewhere. But I need a job somewhere. So it's all in transition right now for the next 2 months, now that I've completed the book journey.
Awesome. I can only imagine what it means to finish that book. Thank you for hanging out. I'm dropping in the chat where you guys can follow the Blackdom thesis and all of the work he's doing on Afro Frontier. And I'm even loving Afro Frontierism, because I can begin to see, I love new words. And I begin, we live during a time where we need some new words. I want to say thank you for Miss Gereen Francis, for hanging out with us, really showing us what happens when these kids come through let's say come through the school system and they show up with aces, they show up with problems, and they can see them when they walk through the front door. We begin to talk about what good looks like. And I'm glad that people like Miss Francis exist, because that means that instead of bad, hey, you get in trouble, you get disciplined, you get pushed one way or the other. There's an opportunity that says they have somebody who is working with you, someone who knows you got in a fight. You also got some unstable situation at home. You got a few aces that have added up, and we're going to keep an eye on you. And we're going to make sure that you have the support you need. And we're not just going to be punitive. We're not going to discipline you. We're not going to treat you like a bad student. We're not going to label you as a dumb athlete. We're going to put you on a path